The Atheist Debates Patreon project presents Get to Know an Activist with Jimmy Snow. Hey everybody, welcome. We are here for another interview with one of my wonderful friends because you guys need to learn, all the people that I interact with and everything else. You have not just a cool story that people need to know, but you've gone from just a couple of years ago being, hey, I'm doing stuff on YouTube, to going, what are you doing, Matt? Why don't you catch up?
That's so not true.
It is true. But we're also working together, so it's okay.
And the show started out as Dear Mr. Atheist, which was just a worse version of a thing bunches of people had already done before. So it was literally like, I'll explain Pascal's wager my way, but there were already better Pascal's wager videos. So then it became less about like answering atheist questions and more about here's people on the internet advocating for the opposite of my values, so I'm going to respond and break down why they're wrong. So it started to kind of pick up when I started responding to Three Mormons, which was this channel of three Mormons telling people why, like, you can't wear a bikini. Actually, one of them was pro-bikini, but it was like, don't touch yourself and don't watch these types of videos.
How can I put on clothes if I'm not touching myself? And so there were three Mormons with a channel called Three Mormons.
Yes.
Hi, Phil Ferguson. But your background was Mormonism.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Tell us where you were and how you got out of there.
So I grew up in the Mormon church with a dad who was basically if they have clergy, it's what their clergy is. Their stuff is weird because they have this structure where nobody's paid until the very top, but people are still expected to volunteer a bunch of time and pay a bunch. So my father had been in the bishoprics, which are kind of like local to one ward, which people won't even necessarily, like one congregation that is expected to meet at a certain time each week. He had been in stake presidencies, which was more of like a regional thing, and then was on the high council. And I was the odd man out of my 12 siblings. I just didn't get along with anybody. And so I was the one who had to drive with him, sometimes hundreds of miles to whichever one he had to do. And so there was this level of religion that I got exposed to at an early age, where by the time I was 14 and 15, I understood more. I knew more of the Mormon version of lore than adults did.
Than the fan fiction they create when they're sitting there.
Yeah, exactly. But my dad also was doing this thing that I think he must regret to this day, where my dad knows how to be skeptical of other Mormons, but not of Mormonism, and knows how to kind of generally be skeptical. So he was teaching me these like little things of like, when you hear a story in testimony meeting where someone's saying something like this. One of the examples I remember was like, when you hear a story that's like, my old mission companion's brother was driving through Louisiana and saw a Baptist church with a sign that says, don't read the Book of Mormon. That's how they get you. And he's like, notice the elements of like, it sounds like somebody who's close enough to be true, but no one could ever verify that story. And so he's teaching me like these little things that grew into skepticism. And I just took it beyond what he took it to. And he would have some of the same problems I have, where it's like, we're told if we pay tithing, God will help us figure out our bills. So is the reason why a child is starving in Africa and will die today was because they didn't pay their tithing? And he'd have the same problems, but he was good enough with the answer of, well, God says this life is but a vapor and I just kept thinking beyond it, which it turns out thinking beyond surface level is poison to your Mormon testimony. Yeah, it's...
Now, your dad does he know that he's teaching you skepticism, or does he not even like understand that there's some structure or name or concept to it? It's just, hey, here's how you don't get conned.
Yeah.
And just didn't turn it back, because I was a skeptic for years before I ever applied it to my religious beliefs. I remember taking a a comparative religions course and going, God, all these other people believe weird shit.
Yeah. Yeah. So he didn't know he was teaching me skepticism by name, though he has since found out. Back when we used to talk, I've told him the same thing, where I'm like, you realize I just took the thing you taught me further, and that's why we believe different now, right? His was actually teaching us as though we were also going... So he was in the Air Force, and he was an OSI investigator. And so he was not just teaching us skepticism, but also how he, as a bishop, used interrogation techniques he learned as an OSI investigator to get like 14-year-old kids to break down crying, admit they're masturbating, and then tell on their friends, which is a horrifically abusive thing to do, and why children should not be trusted with bishops. And this is a whole thing.
When you say telling their friends,
yeah,
I never knew if any of my friends were masturbating, so I couldn't have told on them for that.
Sure, for the way they're sinning, if they're
Sure.
heavy petting, because that's a sin in the
Yeah, oh
church.
yeah. When your buddies tell you about, I kissed Peggy Sue and did this, and that's not allowed.
Yeah, or is anyone showing each other, nude it's mostly sexuality based stuff that they're
That's
always
a lot
looking
of it.
for. And literally from the time you are 8 years old in the church, it's very few from 8 to 12, but starting for sure at 12 rather frequently, you're having these bishop interviews where you are locked in a room, and this is anybody of any gender, with a man who is almost always over 30 being asked about your masturbatory habits, your sexuality, the thoughts you might be having. And as anyone can imagine, this has now turned into a problem.
That's very different. So I grew up a Southern Baptist, and one of the things is I remember summer church camp every summer, and anytime that they were having a revival, there was this incredible cycle of guilt where they'll preach at you to let you know that you're a sinner, despite the fact that you might be saved. You're not living up to what God wants and everything else. And they'll go through the things, and they'll just list off the sins. Not, maybe you went a little too far with your girlfriend. And it's always the guys that are getting raked over the coals over this. Maybe, you've been masturbating. I don't recall ever being asked any question about my sexuality or masturbating. I don't even really recall anybody preaching a sermon or having anything clearly against masturbation. I got busted by my mom once, which was more than enough to make me stop for a while entirely, because it was like, you just don't want to be caught. And even my mom, who is clearly an extreme case of fundamentalist, she was like, you can do that in your bedroom type thing.
Right.
So it wasn't that big of a deal.
Yeah, no, that's a hard sin, pun intended. You're not allowed to do any of that. You're not allowed to look at the stuff, look at porn or anything like that. Your sexuality isn't between just you and you yourself or whatever. It's between you and God and your future spouse and the bishop who checks in on it. You'll have even married couples where they're making sure. I think this happens less today, but I have siblings who have told me the stories of like them being checked in on to make sure none of the things they're doing counts as sodomy together, which to some bishops means anything that isn't missionary.
Please tell me you don't have siblings who are having sex through a hole in the sheet.
No.
Okay, because I've heard of extremes like that on occasion. But
I imagine that's happening in the fundamentalist Mormon church because of the fucked up ways that thing operates. But I don't know of anyone doing that except for maybe vanity reasons.
At this point, so I've seen Mormon porn.
Yeah.
And so they'll put on their undergarments and fuck through a hole in the sheet and all this other stuff. But before we turn this into the debauchery session, at what age did you really start finding yourself out, and how did that impact your relationship with your siblings and your dad and your mom?
So in reverse order, I don't have a relationship with my parents anymore. It actually pretty much ended last year as we got to this moment of not even about me, about another sibling who's still in the church of like, you guys are still using well into people's adulthood this excuse to abuse your adult children still. And so now it's either going to change and you're going to acknowledge it, or a portion of us are going to go off and start our own family. And that's kind of what happened, is we started our own family. As far as what the final straw or anything, it's a phase of things. And I know there's a time period where, because I was trying to hide it, I didn't really believe, but I might go through some of the motions. So when that exact time is, and it's sometime between, I think, 19 and 20 years old or 18 and 20 years old, but it would have been around 21 that I was found out. And it was shortly after I had finally gone, okay, here's everything I know, and here are the possibilities. Either I have a ton of things to reconcile that I just can't and I just have to ignore it, or I could consider for a moment that Joseph Smith made this crap up, that he was a con man interested in getting his dick wet, and not to keep bringing it back to that kind of stuff, but that was it was this moment of going, just that I gave myself permission to consider it, it all fell apart.
That's a huge thing. I remember So I've been a skeptic most of my life. I've also been a magician most of my life, and I was a huge fan of James Randi and Penn and Teller and others.
Same.
And I was an atheist before Randi even publicly said he was in Swift. And one of the greatest experiences of my life was him quoting something I'd said, which is really me just paraphrasing what he had said about skepticism and religion. But for the longest time, even though I found my way out and I was a skeptic, I didn't call myself an atheist, and maybe not for too long, but for a while. And it was Penn and Teller that made it okay, because they're just like, oh yeah, we're atheists. And I was like, hang on, can I give myself permission to use that word? And as soon as I did, things started rapid fire crumbling.
The story that I know people love to hear is the first time I thought it might all be not true. And I remember it pretty distinctly because I was 14. I had brought a girl to church who had been previously a Mormon, but had become inactive. So I was trying to do the bring her back and re-save her kind of thing. And it's Fast and Testimony Meeting, which is the first Sunday of every month in Mormon churches. It's basically Mormon open mic. Anybody can get up and tell, and you end the whole thing with, so I'd like to bear my testimony. I know the church is true. I love my family. I know that Joseph Smith translated the Book of Mormon. It's this sort of listed thing that everybody does the same. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen. Anyway, this woman that gets up, and she's giving her testimony talking about that she realized in her home a man was secretly living there that they didn't know was there. In the walls, in the crawl spaces or something, because she'd have there'd be she would leave for a while and the kids would be there playing, and she'd come back and they'd say someone played with her. With them. And then it would be chores were mysteriously done and such. Anyway, so they have this realization.
That's a good poltergeist to have. Your dishes got done.
Chores, those, I'd stay away from my kids for sure.
Yeah.
So she says that they realize that this has to be a real person in the house from little things happening. So they go around the house basically yelling you have to leave because we have kids. We just can't do the situation. But they were polite about it and then said we're going to leave for a few hours and come back. We'd like you gone. And she comes back and says, the house is spotless. All the chores are done. All the dishes are done. It's so clean. And they could sense he had left. And a feeling of peace came over her because she realized even if this was a person, he was this guardian angel. And she starts to cry about this person living in her house secretly and is crying. And that wasn't the moment I went, oh, this could all be bullshit. It was when I looked around and saw other people crying, other people touched by this batshit story, that I finally, for the first time in my head, went, oh, this could all be bullshit, because I saw other people validating her spiritual experience with their spiritual understanding of things. And I felt very guilty and so in Mormonism, thought crime is a thing. You can sin with just your thoughts. So I repented of all of that and stuff. But it's a story that sticks out because part of it was this girl who I liked was being re-exposed to the church, and this was her reintroduction, and it was just a weird, horrifying story. So that was the first time I went, this might be made up.
This might be, yeah. Testimonies like that are always interesting to me because the natural thing for people to do is to say, someone told me this story, do I have a reason to not believe it?
Yeah.
Instead of saying, do I have a reason to believe it? Because the truth is, we begin with this default that if somebody tells you something in earnest, you already have a reason to believe them. They're a human being who's almost certainly being honest and just sharing their life experience with you. And so if you start asking yourself questions, okay, here's someone who they didn't see or experience anything on their own. There was, here's reports from the kids. And then chores started getting done and they went through all the steps. What's the best explanation for what happened? Well, clearly, she's not just making up a story. And the thing is, she might not be.
Yeah.
There could be a number of, I don't know off the top of my head because I don't know the details, but there could be a number of explanations for why that particular story came out. Because one of the things that we humans do is, I caught a fish this big,
right,
and we're meaning this, and we add this up. And so similarly, she's going, all the chores were done, or all the chores were done.
Either, for me, it's not a less freaky story if all the chores are done.
Yeah.
It's still bizarre, but yeah, I get what you're saying.
But our tendency to kind of exaggerate. Now, at some point, you find your way out, and since this is kind of the get to know an activist thing, I mean, how did you identify early on? I mean, did you use the atheist label? Were you kind of in and out? Did you consider yourself a skeptic?
So I did it the wrong way that I now try to advocate against as much as possible, which is I came out as the angry atheist, fight with everybody, get on Facebook, and I wanted to call 30 people an idiot a day to make myself feel smarter. At the same time, my engagement had just broken up. I'm going through this identity crisis, and I have mental things about myself that I still don't understand. We're just starting off in therapy to get to those. So I'm angry. I feel slighted because I've been lied to. And this is why I give the 90% satirical advice that when you freshly become an atheist, shut the fuck up for 4 years and just listen. Again, 90% satirical, but I didn't do that. I came out very toxic. I had also grown up very conservative, and you try to do little things when big changes like this happen to still sort of ingratiate yourself. You try to be the good one.
Right.
So I tried to be the conservative, but then the libertarian because that was still tolerable, but I couldn't do conservatism. And so I was the libertarian male, early 20s, loved Joe Rogan on, anti-social justice warrior. Videos were what I watched. I was on the forums for pickup artists. Just because I left Mormonism didn't mean I started respecting women or activists.
Oh, you were on the forums for pickup artists to be one?
Correct. Yeah.
Wow.
Don't go there. They're horrible places.
I had a friend who ordered one of those. Like it comes in a box and it's all these instructions on how to pick up women and all this other
like
stuff.
The Supreme version of the game.
And it's all negging and all that. And I read through it and I was like, this is terrible. Like,
Right.
I'd rather not be in a relationship than to have gotten a relationship this way.
It only teaches you how to be an abuser.
It's like the people who read 50 Shades of Grey and all of a sudden think they're an expert in kink.
Right. Yes. Yeah, especially if it was an instruction manual. And the thing is that it's not that those tactics don't work. It's that you become a horrible human being.
Yes, and you're contributing to something. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
I can be a prick and go out and meet somebody and hook up. And especially when you run across people who are naturally submissive or whatever, depending on how you set up the play and the relationship, you can get to a point where you are absolutely in control of somebody's life. And that's not necessarily a good thing, and probably never a good thing to be that much in control of somebody's life.
Yeah, very few exceptions. The only things I'm thinking of is like a family member like my brother who can't control his life because of his condition. But other than that, it's like...
Yes, you're the guardian ad litem or something like that. Yeah. That's functionally different from, yes, today you will eat this and you will do this, and if you don't, then I'm going to spank you type thing.
And I mean, it's a thing where in the last year, the rest of the internet found out what gaslighting was, and then they've spent the year mistaking what it is and being wrong about it 90% of the time.
Aren't you gaslighting them right now by telling them they're wrong about... No, I'm kidding.
Believing in gaslighting, you're all crazy. No, of course I'm kidding. But no, it's now overused as a term, which is unfortunate because in its abusive, horrible form, it's basically, pickup is just teaching you how to gaslight. I mean, it's literally like, I remember watching later, and so I'll make fun of pickup artists on my channel, this guy who I'd call Billy because he doesn't give a name on, and I know that he must be easily emasculated from his presentation, so I always call him Billy. There's a shoulder movement to it. Anyway, him talking about like, if you get caught cheating, here's how to blame her and tell her it's her fault you cheated. And it's literally a system of gaslighting. And so that's my journey out, is into other horrible places that I can't say are better than being a Mormon.
How'd you get better?
Therapy, first of all, learning empathy for people that... because you really do. In Mormonism, you only learn to have empathy for other people, and they teach you to get rid of it for everybody else. So when you leave Mormonism, you don't suddenly switch. You still are, my worldview is the correct worldview, which unfortunately you actually do see a lot of toxicity in ex-Mormons at first, and you kind of have to intercept them and go, guys, don't do this, because it's so common. Therapy was a big part of it, but then most of it is, this is why I advocate for, if you are not in danger yourself for doing this, be friends with bigots. Because I was a bigot and my friends are, who exposure to having trans friends, having queer friends, having female friends. It was exposure to the people that I was not even considering whether or not they were right or not, just that I was in my own tower and I understood the brains of strangers better than they did. That exposure is what did it. So this is why I say, like, again, if you are in a class of people who, you know, being friends with a racist might kill you, that I'm not saying. Sure. But whereas you might be the reason a person is no longer a bigot later. 'Cause there were people for me.
Yeah, there's the Netflix documentary, The African American Man Who Hangs Out with KKK People and is nice to them and ultimately talks them out of it and
collects their robes.
It's nice to remember that when you're talking about strategy and how you're going to go about potentially changing the world and how we're going to make, you know, atheist normacy, how we're going to promote skepticism, how we're going to promote humanism. There's not just one way.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, I do a call-in show, you do a call-in show, most of our friends do call-in shows.
Yeah.
You also do news and information shows and things like that. I don't do that as much. I do, obviously, this stuff, which is not a call-in show. So welcome to the Atheist Debates Project, where hopefully we're teaching people how to have conversations better.
Yeah.
Because I've been learning over the years, too. There's new people involved with ACA Productions, and there always is. You know, Kenneth Leonard, J. Mike, and others have come in to work on Talk Heathen. And just in this short period of time that, you know, some of them there, including some of my co-hosts, Shannon, Jenna, Jim, Dave, there are things that I learned from all of them. There are things that I learned from you. And watching, I remember you were Mr. Atheist, and then that kind of became a label that you weren't as fond of in a way.
Yeah. So I started as, the show was Dear Mr. Atheist, and at the time I used to do, it's barely not the Stewie Griffin impression, but it was meant to sound more like Richard Dawkins, where it was, Dear Mr. Atheist. Every episode of, why do you hate God? It would be, Stewie Griffin's down here for anybody who's looking for that deep cut on Matt's channel. But anyway, so I would do this sort of Dawkins-esque sound, and then I'd answer. And then as things went on, I found out it was a barrier for people who want to subscribe but can't, because they can't have, if my parents see Dear Mr. Atheist in my subscription feed, sure, I'm screwed. It was actually a business obstruction too, where people were like, look, we'd love to work with you and your channel's fine, but that name's too controversial, we can't do that. So that, as far as like sponsorships and stuff, and it has become my life and my business, and I have employees, so business consideration is something. But I'd say the biggest thing is that atheism used to mean something to me that it shouldn't have, because I weighed it down with a bunch of stuff that it isn't true. So I associated atheism with humanism and activism and things. And so while I still want to hold on to the atheist label, there were too many people who thought I was the other atheist YouTubers, first of all.
Sure.
And it's basically, oh, Mr. Atheist must be an anti-SJW, trans-hating person.
Did you get confused with TJ a lot?
Yes. Yeah.
And anytime, like I do the Atheist Experience. I host the Atheist Debates thing. This channel, as of the time of this recording, the channel you're watching on this in is not monetized and has never been. That has to change, by the way. Fair warning, YouTube's going to monetize everything whether I want to or not. So I'd rather get the money. So this will all be monetized at some point. But I understand. If I would have done...
Some people thought I looked like TJ too, because I had the long hair, and they were like...
similar hair color and stuff, yeah. But if I were to change it, like, I have no interest in changing the names of anything. I understand that if instead of Atheist Debates, I would have done Skeptic Teaching, or your weekly dose of skepticism, or Critical Thinking Plus.
Yeah.
All of those would have been far better. Now, I wasn't monetized, so I didn't care about the algorithm. And the Atheist Experience, the name of that show, like, if we changed it, I'd probably leave, because it's not about marketing. And while I'd love, on the one hand, I'd love to reach as many people as possible. On the other hand, I don't want to do it in a way that makes me feel like I'm compromising, because atheism shouldn't be a dirty word. It should not be a problematic word. It's Christian that should be more problematic than atheist. It is Muslim that should be more problematic than atheist. And that's a source of constant frustration, that the world is in some ways upside down.
Yeah.
How have you been, like, you've moved away from Dear Mr. Atheist a bit. I mean, you still have it, but that's obviously been very successful for you. What are you looking at moving forward? Because we got a show to do in a little while.
Yeah. So, I mean, another big reason why I popped off Mr. Atheist is it doesn't make sense for all the direction I was taking things. So while I still do atheist content and still call myself an atheist, most of the stuff now I do is political and social commentary. Because I've made the 100 videos on how I deconstructed my Mormonism, and I don't have more to say about those topics until I do.
I've done kind of the same thing. And don't get me wrong, there's still more coming on the Atheist Debates project, including this month, that is specific about religion. And I'm digging in on different parts of the Bible. I'm digging in on philosophy and stuff like that. But I get asked for interviews all the time. And I tend to say yes to most anybody. I mean, podcasts with 25 subscribers, I don't care. I want to get out there, and I want to promote those other people who, don't have the platform I do. If I see somebody doing something good. But this process has been a little bit frustrating in that people are like, oh, we'd love to have you on the show. Can you come tell us about your deconversion story? And I realize I'm doing that with you today a little bit.
That's okay.
But I no longer accept any interviews where they want to ask questions specifically about me.
Yeah.
Instead, I want to talk about the projects.
Yeah.
And similarly, I no longer endorse people or organizations. I endorse specific actions. So if we do a fundraiser for Recovering from Religion, obviously I'm a fan of the organization. But it's not me saying everything this has ever said, because all that does is wind up getting us in trouble. One of these days, I hope it never happens. One of these days, one of us might piss off the other one at some point, and I can say it doesn't matter because the shit that Jimmy and I did together is stuff that I'm proud of and was good.
We've already done that. So. Yeah, we've both pissed each other off at some point. Mostly while playing Among Us, but we've done it.
Oh yeah, well that's fair.
Yeah, our friendship survived Among Us.
It's just because I'm way better at it than you and everybody else that plays. It's just not even fair. Sorry, that's
I let you use your words. I used my face.
Yeah.
No, I feel.
But I can edit this out and just put a box over your face.
That's true. I mean, I'm moving to Austin. A big part of moving to Austin is to do more with the ACA.
Yeah.
Obviously, just because I'm not Mr. Atheist doesn't mean I'm not going to show up on the Atheist Experience. And I was going to say if I'm ever invited. I've already been invited, so that's yeah. It wasn't
big secret.
Wasn't trying to nudge and be presumptuous. And I still am fine with it listed as one of my things. I just don't really I would never want to go on, say Fox News called me to represent the other side, and I would totally do that. I wouldn't want it to just say Jimmy Snow Atheist except in a few certain contexts, because the word humanist means more to me. A lot of my political titles mean more to me, because unfortunately, like you were saying, it should be worse to be called a Christian, or it's not just that it should be sort of existentially, it's that it isn't yet better. Right now, if you're telling me, hey, you're going to meet two people, one of them is going to be a Christian, one of them is going to be an atheist, I'm going to have and you have to pick one to hang out with for the afternoon. My follow-up question is going to be, well, what kind are either of them? And right now, it's kind of a crapshoot. So if you tell me it's a progressive Christian and an anti-SJW atheist, I'm going with the progressive Christian.
Most of the time, I'm going to pick the Christian anyway, because there's more of an opportunity there. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm happy to sit down with humanists and secularists and skeptics, but I don't, for many of them, I don't have as much to talk to them about, although, to be fair, I have spent more time over the last couple of years talking with and correcting fellow atheists or skeptics or humanists, because I don't want our side to have bad arguments. The other side's got plenty. Yeah. Let's just keep showing their bad arguments and stop propping ours up, because they're bad all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, and my point just being, as far as the random bag of what you're going to get, part of the reason why the word, it's almost like there was a stigma with the word atheist, and a bunch of people went, well, that's not really true, but let's go make it true. Let's go make it, let's make the stigmas look like, and so never become the meme the other side wants you to be.
Right.
And that's so that was my sort of disenchantment with, I'm going to be with a bunch of atheists. That means we're going to agree on, if you think it means you're for sure going to agree on more than one thing, you're wrong.
Oh, yeah.
That's just the one thing. And sometimes the way they describe it, you're like, I'm not even sure we agree on that. So that's...
There's far too much, and don't get me wrong, it's important. There's a lot of discussion and arguing about labels. And I did a video where I was like, I don't give a crap what you call yourself. Ultimately, it gets down to what we're actually talking about. What does it mean? What's the substance here? Because if the words and the labels are getting in the way, we should dump them or we should change them, which is how I came up in part with Fergalburgle, Manergalburgle, but that's now taken on a life of its own.
Yeah, it's its own thing.
So to kind of wrap this up, first of all, as Jimmy mentioned, he's moving to Austin, and there will be more of these, and we're working together on a number of different projects. But if you're not already familiar, and what rock have you been living under, you can go watch and listen to Jimmy's stuff. But also, we're working together on the Line Network, which the Hang Up Show, which we're doing together tonight. And there are more shows and more educational opportunities coming, both with regard to call-in shows. But if you have questions for myself or for Jimmy, you can always email. I appreciate everybody who's supporting us on Patreon and the people who show up at the shows for the super chats and things like that. But I want to make sure that when we get activists in here, and I know that this was kind of the background introduction, we want to talk more about what we're doing moving forward on activism issues. And my activism is curiously broader than I expected early on. And yet narrower than I think it perhaps should be still, because I am primarily focused on the problems related to religion. And that goes both for the individuals who believe and think they have a good reason when they perhaps don't, and the impact of those beliefs and the privileged status of religion. So working towards church-state separation and making sure that people who find themselves leaving religion are able to get resources from recovering from religion, from the Secular Therapy Project, which I used to mistakenly call the Secular Therapist Project, but it's therapy. In any case, please give us a like. Let us know if you have questions. You can drop them down in the comments below, and we will be seeing you on the Line, on the Hang Up, anywhere and everywhere, including this very Atheist Debates project. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with us. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Awkward salute. Why did I do that? I was never in the military.
This video is made possible by supporters of the Atheist Debates Patreon project. You can find more information and add your support at patreon.com/atheistdebates.